The BYU Cougars finally got some good news in the transfer portal on Monday evening. The big question that remains, though, can this young man make tight ends great again at BYU?
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Of course, FanDuel is here for you guys. Get you $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. It's as simple as that. Get started today at FanDuel.com. All right, let's talk all things BYU football, but more importantly, the tight end position. Monday evening, some of you may have seen it. If you did not, Carsen Ryan, a transfer from Utah by way of UCLA, is officially going to be a BYU Cougar. He announced that on social media. And on its head, some of you are saying, well, what about tight ends? Why does BYU need a tight end? Well, they needed a tight end because they are going to have a pretty strong exodus of talent out of that position group. This was a position group that was quite bloated with the number of bodies that were in it this past season. If I recall correctly, the number I had was 11 tight ends on the roster. They're going to lose 4 guys to graduation. They're going to lose Reiner Swanson to a mission. He's going to Nairobi, Kenya, of all places, for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Congratulations to him. We'll be leaving in the next month-ish, I believe. But the big question was, with all that talent leaving BYU, what was going to happen with the tight end position? Obviously, you retain a guy like Ethan Erickson when he's been healthy. Ethan's been a very capable tight end, but the problem is he has been beset. I mean, absolutely beset by injuries the past couple of seasons in particular. Then that obviously leaves some other guys that are young talent. You look at a guy like Noah Moeaki, fresh off a mission, looking to kind of get his legs underneath him. Can he be a guy who can step up next year, maybe fill in a role that BYU needs at tight end? I think the simple fact of the matter is BYU needed a guy of Carsen Ryan's caliber to come in and stabilize the position, even if it is a one-year shot, because he has 1 year of eligibility remaining. In this era of transfer portal where guys are using COVID years, medical red shirts, and every other seemingly loophole to play extra years, Carsen Ryan may absolutely be one of a kind in the fact that he's going to play 4 straight years, barring something unforeseen, and be done with his collegiate career. It's crazy, but that's the way things stand. He enrolled at UCLA 3 seasons ago, played 2 years in Westwood playing for the Bruins, then spent this past season playing for the University of Utah in their tight end unit. And now he gets an opportunity, I think, on paper right now, to be BYU starting tight end in 2025. I think he is that good of a player. Now, statistics-wise, pretty modest for his career. 400 yards receiving on 29 receptions. None of those are going to say, wow, that's absolutely phenomenal numbers. 4 touchdowns. He does average 13.8 yards per reception. That's a pretty healthy number there. But like I said, none of these numbers scream to you, wow, that guy is going to go for 500, 600 yards next year at BYU. But I also look at it, he has played in some offenses and alongside other guys who have taken, I think, a lot of the snaps and balls that would be thrown his way often have been going to other guys during his time at UCLA and obviously at Utah as well. So I think this is a big opportunity for both BYU and Carsen Ryan to essentially show that they can have a beneficial relationship. There's a lot of people out there. Trust me, when the news came out that Carsen Ryan was going to BYU, my social media feed had some people, it's not going to really matter. Then you get a new play caller because they don't throw the ball to the tight end. That's kind of the refrain I hear from a certain section of the BYU fan base. This is a big opportunity for Carsen Ryan to come in and really show what he's capable of. The other thing is Aaron Roderick, his offense will feature tight ends when tight ends are able to produce at a high level. Look no further than what Isaac Rex showed during his legendary, and I call it a legendary career because he was very, very good. He's got some all-time marks in BYU football history for a tight end. You don't have to look very far to see tight ends being featured in this BYU offense. And the hope is, once again, that Carsen Ryan can come in, prove himself, and get the balls that I think he rightly deserves, because I'll say this right as well. I am a guy who's been a big fan of Carsen Ryan's ever since he was playing in the high school ranks in the state of Utah. He's a kid from Orem High School. He's not Orem. He grew up in Orem, played at both American Fork and Timpview High School, and then went to UCLA. I was very hopeful BYU may land him out of high school. And then when he hit the transfer portal after a couple of seasons down at UCLA, I was like, wow, BYU should get into the mix there. Didn't work out at that time either. But the third time is the charm. And BYU is going to be the beneficiary of having a guy like Carsen Ryan coming in. The one thing I do believe that he will bring is he's a potent blocker from the tight end position. He proved that as an H-back at UCLA, more of an inline tight end last year for Utah. If he can combine that blocking ability and finally get an opportunity to really showcase what he can do in the receiving game, I don't think there's any reason why this can't be a mutually beneficial relationship, a symbiotic relationship, if you will, for BYU to A, feature a tight end once again heavily in their offense, and B, have a guy like Carsen Ryan benefit from being the quote-unquote guy for BYU at that tight end spot. There'll be other guys, like I mentioned, Ethan Erickson, Noah Moiaki in particular, that I can think of would be candidates to take some of the reps away from him. But I think Carsen Ryan's coming in thinking, I am option number one at tight end for BYU, and I'm finally going to get my time, my share, my due, as it were, at tight end. And hopefully his relationship with Jake Retzloff proves that once again to be beneficial for all parties involved, and BYU by extension benefits from this as well. So I look at this as a good start in the transfer portal for BYU. Is it a finished product? Absolutely not. BYU has a number, and I mean a number of options out there. Not options, but needs, I would say, in the transfer portal to bring into this program. Two of them that I thought were guys I had on my short list of candidates that BYU may pursue in the transfer portal opted to go elsewhere yesterday as well. It was shaping up as a pretty rough day until Carsen Ryan committed to BYU. Samote Pepa, a defensive tackle I thought would have done well at BYU and potentially could have started similar to Carsen Ryan at a position of need for BYU, opted to commit to Washington. Isaac Wilson, I know the quarterback's a bit of an interesting deal, but he opted to return to Utah, so that takes him off of the list of BYU potential targets. So the thing is, BYU still has a lot of work to do in the transfer portal, and we'll dig into what those needs are, where I see the needs are, and what coaches like Aaron Roderick have said they are looking for in the transfer portal. And we'll dig into those coming up momentarily right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at the College Football Playoff. It's that time of year. The College Football Playoff is back, and it's bigger and better than ever. With the new expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better, bringing the hard-hitting, and high-flying excitement that you love. And, of course, TNT Sports coverage of the College Football Playoff begins December 21st. That's this Saturday, starting with the College Football Playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 9 a.m. Mountain Time for those of you here in Utah. Leading into their first matchup, the SMU Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon Eastern, 10 a.m. Mountain Time. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. That's 2 o'clock Mountain. Don't miss a moment of that action. Watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and also our friends at Max. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Hope you guys are having a fantastic Tuesday whenever you hear and or watch this. All right, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the transfer portal that BYU still needs to get after. Well, number one, they got a nice tight end, obviously, to bolster the offense. Aaron Roderick said it himself yesterday during media availability that one of the targets, or I guess two of the targets that BYU is going to be looking at are at offensive tackle, because you look at a guy like Caleb Etienne, Braden Keim, they're going to be exiting the program, and they're very likely to be NFL draft picks. I think both of them could hear the names called next April in the NFL draft. Well, that leaves a dearth at both right and left tackle for BYU, and I think BYU absolutely needs to bring in one, probably two offensive tackle types. Are they going to be outright star offensive linemen? Maybe not, but for depth's sake, at minimum, I feel like you need to bring in some guys at that offensive tackle position. That's exactly what Aaron Roderick, he said. He also said, mentioned tight end as a position of need. Does that mean they're going to get another guy beyond Carsen Ryan? That's TBD. But he also said that if they need a quarterback out of the portal, said not necessarily. He said they're very happy with Retzloff, McKay Hillstead, and Trayson Bourget to be solid at the spot. But he said never say never. If the right guy were essentially to come along and it's like a no-brainer for BYU to bring in a quarterback via the portal, they're not going to hesitate to do that. But they're also, like I said, not in dire straits needing a guy, because it's nice to have a guy who went 10-2 this past year as a starting quarterback and have him back for another season under center for the BYU football program. So it's a good spot to be, but I think offensive line, in particular offensive tackle, absolutely a need for BYU in the portal, because you can't go into next year having essentially a blank slate at offensive tackle. I really am high on Isaiah Jota, so I think you could pencil him in. Now, it is not going to be either him or Braden Keim at right tackle for BYU in this upcoming bowl game, as Aaron Roderick did add that neither one of them are healthy enough to play in the Alamo Bowl. So that's a concern. Could that be that Waylon Lapuaho slides back out to right tackle like he did against Houston? TBD. But the bigger point to be made here is Isaiah Jota figures to be one of BYU's tackles next year. But can you tell me another guy beyond him that you would say, yeah, that's absolutely a guy who's going to be a starting tackle or at least a depth piece for BYU at tackle right now? I would have a hard time saying that. I think you could look at a guy like Caden Chittister, potentially. You also could look like Jake Eichhorn. You could look at Trevin Osler. There's a few guys on the roster that are worth looking at, but I don't think any of them are like a home run that's absolutely a guy. And that's where my concern is with the offensive tackle positions. And right now, if you were to ask me, what's the most pressing offensive or defensive position group for BYU to target in the portal? For me, it's offensive line, in particular offensive tackle. That's why I spent so much time talking about it here. Number two, flipping over to the defense, it's cornerback. When you lose Jacob Robinson, you lose Mark Collins, you have a question mark beyond that as to guys that are going to step up. Is Marcus McKenzie finally healthy enough to step into a role where he can be an every down cornerback? Big question mark there. Is Trey Alexander, Jonathan Cabay, are those guys ready to take that next leap? There's question marks. And I think you need to look at what you can find in the portal to come in. And even if they're maybe not top line number one corners, similar to offensive tackle, just to have them for experience and depth sake, it's a great thing to have coming into your program. And I'm sure that a guy like Gennaro Guilford, who may be the most thorough in terms of examining all the options available to him, and I'm talking at the high school, the junior college, and also the transfer portal ranks, he will find options out there. The question mark is, can BYU get them to commit? Because similar to every other position out there in college football, when it comes to the transfer portal, when you have interest in a guy, guess what? There's probably 10, 12, maybe 20 or 30 other teams who also have interest in those guys. So it's a really interesting deal to watch how this all unfolding for BYU, but I'm also hopeful that BYU will find the right options given adequate time. I think there's also a little word of caution I should add here is that the transfer portal has only been open for about a week and a half now. It's open until the 28th of December. That's when BYU plays their bowl game. We still got nearly a week and a half before that portal window closes. And then obviously there's also going to be guys who, after they finish their bowl games, which extend beyond that deadline, could still hit the transfer portal because they have that little exception. If you're still playing games, you can still enter the portal after your season ends officially. So there are still going to be options for guys to hit the portal, whether it's guys finishing up in bowl games, guys continuing to go through their exit interviews to get a sense of where they stand with their various programs. So I also don't think that if BYU doesn't land these guys right now, it's going to be an absolute death knell to BYU's chances in the portal. Yes, it would be nice to see them pick up some momentum off of the Carsen Ryan commit and obviously add some guys. I think like Andrew Gentry, who I hear, this is just what I've heard from people, is the BYU is in his finalist group. Now, who is that group beyond BYU? That part I do not know. So I apologize if I'm not able to lend any more intel on that. But if you could get a guy like Andrew Gentry, similar to Carsen Ryan, BYU pursued him out of high school, pursued him after his mission via the transfer portal. Could the third time be the charm, similar to Carsen Ryan for Andrew Gentry? I think Andrew Gentry would slot in at minimum as your starting right tackle, maybe your starting left tackle next year for BYU. But you have to beat out, it feels like, just an incredible amount of other teams out there who have interest in guys of his caliber. Offensive linemen, I've said it before on this podcast, are at an absolute premium in the transfer portal. There may be even more of a rare scarcity, I don't know. They're more scarce in almost any other position out there in the transfer portal. Speaking of offensive linemen, particularly high-level offensive tackle talent. It doesn't hurt that a guy like Andrew Gentry has been trained up in one of the better offenses for offensive linemen at Michigan over the past, I think it's 3 years he has spent there all told. So hopefully, if he does pick BYU, he finally can ascend to a starting role, be a regular starter, and show what he's capable of in a Cougar uniform. And I think it would do well to help BYU out. Other position groups I would be looking at if I'm BYU. I was concerned about this last year, talking about BYU's defensive line. I had massive question marks. Those of you who are everydayers can go back and listen to those podcasts. And I talked about the fact I cannot believe BYU's not doing something on the defensive line front to bolster their ranks. Well, I was wrong, because when you look at John Nelson, you look at a guy like Blake Mangelson, they proved to be everything BYU needed at defensive tackle. The problem is now those guys are exiting the program. I believe that BYU is in more of a need at defensive line right now than they were a year ago. But maybe, just maybe, I'm wrong again, and my evaluation of BYU's defensive line is off, because they have not, based on the intel out there, whether it's offers being reported and the like, they have not targeted a lot of defensive linemen out there. As I mentioned, they missed out on Simote Pepa. I thought he would have been a guy that BYU would have done well to land, but he opted to go to Washington. So maybe BYU is essentially going to continue to bet on continuity, training up the guys in the program that they've brought up through the high school ranks. I just have question marks that is it going to be a guy like a David Latu taking another step forward? Is Josh Singh ready for an every down role at defensive tackle, even though he's undersized? I look at all the different bodies there. John Talmoya payout. Is Sani Tuwala, is he ready to really step forward after a year training coming in from a junior college background? Are those guys ready to kind of step forward and be the every down guys and fill the roles of John Nelson and Blake Mangelson? If they are, great. BYU will be in a good spot. But if they're not, that's where I start to get a little bit concerned about where BYU may be lacking in terms of their ability to compete next year, particularly in the trenches up front. But I also look at this and understand that BYU, remember, 2 seasons ago went heavy in the portal, and it didn't play out the way they expected it to. Last year, they went lighter in the portal, bet more on continuity, and it yielded what is currently a 10-2 record with a chance to go to 11-2. So who am I to argue with what the formula has been for BYU, at least looking at the 2-year sample size? It appears to go maybe a little bit lighter on the transfer portal, kind of fit positions of extreme need. Like I mentioned, tight end, offensive tackle, cornerback. I think those 3 are absolute must-fill type jobs for BYU in the transfer portal. But maybe don't be looking to bring in mass quantities of transfer portal guys, because the development and the continuity in the program seems to have been the more proven route for BYU at this point. So very interesting times ahead. I will add one other position group I would be looking at, and it's something you'll hear, I think, coming out more and more, is maybe BYU looks at wide receiver. If they can find the right guy out there at wide receiver, that might be something BYU considers, but that's obviously up to Fesi Sitake, Aaron Roderick, and the rest of the BYU Brain Trust led by Kalani Sitake to see if that might be a role that they fill opposite it maybe of a guy, let's say, and I don't know this for sure. I'm expecting that Chase Roberts at this juncture to come back to play for BYU. I think the writing's on the wall that he can cash in on NIL, and I think he can do very well to come back for another year at BYU, even though it seems like he has been pretty intent on going to the NFL. But if he were to come back, if you can find the right guy in the portal out there to step up and maybe be the complement to him, or if JoJo Phillips, Keelan Marion, one of these other guys already in the program steps up, BYU would be in a very good spot. But I think that's probably the 4th position, maybe, just maybe, BYU looks a little heavier at when it comes to transfer portal. And I guess I'll also add a look at just maybe the best player available. If you can find an elite talent, regardless of position, why wouldn't you bring them in? That's the other thing about this, is the portal can be an opportunity to bring in impact players. And if you can find the right impact player that could obviously lift BYU, that would be a very, very smart thing to do. So I don't think there's necessarily a ton of needs for BYU on the portal front, but there are some glaring ones. And then obviously the flexibility potentially to bring in, quote, game-changing, unquote, type talents. You absolutely pursue those, regardless of what you have already in the program. All right, coming up next, I owe some of you guys answers to questions you have asked. Yes, we're going to get to a mailbag, I guess an early mailbag here on the podcast, answering some questions that lingered over from last week. We'll get to those momentarily as you roll on right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys to help you have some fun when it comes to the NFL all season long. You can tackle all the action with FanDuel. They are America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. It's as simple as that. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place your live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get the hunch in the middle of a game, you can cast that bet while also looking at the latest stats, you live play-by-play, and so much more on that same page where you're placing the bet. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. Once again, you'll start with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. It's as simple as that. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Now, Prize Picks is here for you guys to have some fun in the daily fantasy sports site. If you like to have fun with daily fantasy sports, Prize Picks is the best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. You win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. The best part is the best way to get on the action on more than 30 states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and Florida. And it's the best place to get your real sports money action with over 10 million members. And sign up today. Join now because this holiday season, Prize Picks is giving away 2 free picks in December. And they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during what they're calling Pixmas. Take advantage today. Sign up today and get $50 instantly. You play $5. You don't even win to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. And of course, Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions. They lead to big payouts, and they also offer select player projections up to 25% extra to provide you even more value for your lineups as well. So go online, download the app today, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege to get that $50 instantly to place your first $5 lineup. It's as simple as that. Download the app, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege, and get $50 instantly after you play that first $5 lineup. That's, of course, all courtesy of Prize Picks, because I like to say you can run your game. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. If you have not done so already, join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group, get the inside scoop on all things BYU that I'm hearing from my sources inside the BYU football and basketball programs. Just $5 a month, but more importantly, you get a 14-day free trial, 2 full weeks to see if it's right for you, and just $5 a month afterwards. The best part is these updates come to your phone in the form of a text message. It's not much more intimate and much more direct than that. You can have one-on-one conversations with myself. Join us today. The link is in the show notes, whether you're watching and or listening to this, or reach out to us and we'll get you the link as well. But join us today on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right. Before we go on today's show, I had some questions sent in last week and never got a chance to actually answer them. Let's start off with the BYU basketball one. It comes from Tyson Clark. These are all from our Locked On Cougars Insider Group, by the way. It says this: what games do you want to see BYU basketball schedule next season now that we know that AJ Dybantsa is coming to BYU? Give me any and all big names. They talked about Duke. If BYU can play Duke, I'm all for it. Kevin Young said it that he would have liked to have beefed up the non-conference schedule for BYU this year, but considering when he was hired at BYU and obviously trying to get schedules set, and obviously there's a lot of machinations that happen to get high-profile teams to play you, I think he did as well as he could for this year, but I would expect with AJ Dybantsa, the overall attention that BYU basketball is garnering right now, you're going to see them get a lot more high-profile matchups moving forward. And I think Duke, I would love to see Gonzaga back on the schedule. Give me any and all big matchups. Now, you're obviously going to lose some of those probably just because of the simple fact of the matter is there are elite programs out there, but we all know that the Big 12, it is a league that is going to test you. I have got concerns that BYU is not battle-tested enough going into this Big 12 season. You play some of the teams I think BYU might be capable of scheduling next year with AJ Dybantsa in the lineup. I think it'd be more than battle-tested if it comes to fruition. So, yeah, essentially give me any and all big names. Give me Duke. Give me North Carolina. Heck, give me a team like Gonzaga, UConn, any of them. I want all comers. And I know that may sound like they're biting off more than they can chew, but I think at the same time, I think BYU's ready for the challenge. I think Kevin Young is more than ready for the challenge there. Brandon asked this question: which of those 3 Christmas movies that Connor mentioned have you not seen? And what is your favorite Christmas movie? Now, I believe Connor said that the 3 were, I don't remember what 3 they were, but I'll just tell you this. Of the 3 movies, he said, I think one of them was the Polar Express, and that's one I have not seen. I'm admitting this right now on the podcast. I have never seen the Polar Express all the way through, nor do I have intention of watching it. Just does not catch my eye. It never caught my eye when it came out. I know, trust me, there are a lot of y'all out there who love that movie. It's a family classic for a number of you. just never caught my eye. It's never really caught my wife's eye. I don't think she's ever seen it all the way through. It's just not something that we watch in our family. So that's it. I remember what the other two that Connor said that he had seen that were some of his favorites, but I'll just say this, the Polar Express, probably not going to watch it anytime soon, and it's also not my favorite. My favorite, geez. Christmas Vacation is one that I watch every single year. I'm also very fond of A Christmas Story, and one of my all-time favorites is Jingle All the Way. Kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Oh man, that's a classic. If you have not seen Jingle All the Way, it is old school. Man, Sinbad is in it. It's cheesy as all get out because it's kind of the post Terminator. Remember Arnold had a run there of multiple movies, Kindergarten Cop and the like. The Last Action Hero, I think, came out in that era as well. But Jingle All the Way, those are some of my favorites. So they're ones I watch routinely every year. I'm a big Home Alone fan. Now, Home Alone 1 and 2. Beyond that, they're abysmal. But the originals with Macaulay Culkin, absolute classics as well. So those are some of my favorites when it comes to Christmas movies. Let's see. What are your thoughts? Speaking coming from Chris Okawa, what are some of your thoughts on the changes coming, like revenue share and roster restrictions? Do you think BYU will find a competitive advantage in this new environment, i.e., will it help, hurt, or not impact BYU any differently? Well, it's going to hurt in the fact that BYU won't have as robust a walk-on program as they have had in the past. BYU is a university that a lot of young men aspire to play for. Maybe they're late bloomers, and they're not necessarily what BYU is looking for when they're being recruited out of high school, but walk-ons have come through BYU routinely and have been impact players for BYU football. Having that cut from 123 men to 105 men in football, that's a concern that maybe you lose out on some of those guys. They don't get to come and prove themselves at BYU, and that they go to another university. And it just, I think it's going to hurt BYU in that circumstance. Now, the revenue share side of it, so long as BYU opts into the full revenue share and is offering up a full money to their athletes via revenue share, and obviously the impact of NIL beyond that with the Royal Blue and Coug Connect out there, great. Keep yourself in the game financially, because that's how it's going to have to be in this day and age. Obviously, I know the BYU is very image conscious, and they don't want to necessarily be a Brinks truck and backing it up to bring in top tier talent. But if you want to compete at the highest level, and I can assure you that BYU has every intention of competing at the highest level, guess what it requires? It requires dinero, folks. It requires money. It's just the filthy lucre. It's absolutely something that you've got to be a part of. Let's see here. What are your thoughts on Kevin Young trying to get players to stay longer? I know it's most likely not to happen with players like Jaeger Demon and AJ Dybantsa, but I know that the big selling point is, quote, get guys into the NBA, end quote. But he's paid to lead successful college basketball programs, not get guys to the NBA overall. I love the direction of the basketball program, though, and think that they're in a very good trajectory. Your thoughts? It comes from Andy. I understand the thought process there, Andy, and I do think that Kevin Young, he will, if guys are on the kind of the precipice of saying, do I jump or do I stay? I think he would advocate for them to stay and develop in his program. Now, there comes a point, if you're like a top 10 pick, Kevin Young, if you're going to stick around, because he would tell you, no, you got to go, because that's life-changing type money. You have an opportunity to be an impact player early on in your NBA career. At that point, you jump. But maybe if you're more towards the tail end of the first round, and the thought process is maybe you come back, work for another year in BYU system. I'm thinking right now of a guy like Cannon Catchings, for example. He's being projected late first round or as a second round pick. That's a guy that I think if you're Kevin Young, you say, hey, I know it wasn't in your plans to be here maybe more than a year, but stick around for another season. Let's see what we can accomplish and see if we can improve your draft stock. And obviously there's an NIL component that comes into that, because my compatriot over at the KSL Sports Zone, Patrick Kinahan, and I trust him when he says stuff like this, has said that Jaeger Demon has had conversations with BYU about potentially staying for a second year if his draft stock slips. But the thing the conversation was, if you want me to stick around, if I do stick around, you got to make up the difference financially. And that means there's millions of dollars at stake in that circumstance. And that's the interesting part about this is Kevin Young. Yes, he is looking to make BYU into a place where young men can come and develop and play high level hoops and obviously make it to the NBA. But it's also, like you mentioned, not an NBA factory. You have to win basketball games. And I think that Kevin Young's going to have to strike a balance there. Will it take some time to find the perfect balance? Sure. There's no doubt about that. But I do think that it will work out in the end, given the adequate time. But we'll see. Casey asked this question. In the midst of the transfer window, I'm curious on the inner workings of how NIL offers work. I very well could have missed it, but I don't think I have ever heard any great insight into the process and how it functions. Are players representing themselves? Are they working with agents? Where does a school start on an offer? How do they value a particular player or position group in order to be competitive with other suitors, but not to offer up the farm with any given player, being sure to leave room for others, etc. If there's an episode you have dug into this, I would love to hear more. I have kind of alluded to it in bits and pieces, Casey. The long and short of it is all of that is involved. Some players represent themselves. Some of them have agents. I think the majority of them at this point probably do have an agent or somebody that they trust to negotiate on their behalf. But also, how do schools value different positions? That's absolutely a question mark. Some teams may have more of an emphasis on quarterbacks, while others are more emphasizing the trench play. Everybody has a different philosophy when it comes to this, and there's no tried and true method to the NIL. How do offers come about? It's as simple as you'll send a text message, speaking of a coach, when a guy hits the portal and say, "Hi, I'm Coach so-and-so from X University. We are interested in you. Are you interested in potentially talking with us further?" If the athlete responds no, you say, "Thank you for your time," and you literally move on to the next. It's that short of a conversation in some circumstances. If they say yes, you consider the conversation, you continue that conversation, maybe make some phone calls, get them out on a visit, etc. It moves quick. I mean, very quick in the transfer portal. Guys will be planning to make a trip to a university the next day, and all of a sudden they get a call from that university saying, "Hey, we took another guy from your position. Thanks, but no thanks." And they have to pivot and go elsewhere. It's happening at BYU. It's happening at every other university across the country. And it's a crazy time. And it really happens that quickly. You essentially, if that guy says, "Hey, I'm interested," you say, "Hey, we have this much in NIL. This is what we're offering revenue share wise. Are you still interested in it?" Yes, no. It moves at a lightning pace, Casey. Whereas high school recruiting can play out over months, if not years, the transfer portal, it plays out in minutes, if not hours, in certain circumstances. It is crazy. And maybe I can dig more into that on a future edition as I can ask around a little bit more about that, but hopefully that it kind of gives you the quick synopsis of how things look. Let's see. Final word here. Matt Lee, and he asked this question to Connor last week because I got to know your favorite Christmas movie and favorite Star Wars movie. And Connor said was right that Revenge of the Sith was the best of the prequels. I would agree with that. Best of the saga is still Empire Strikes Back. Regarding the sequels, he's wrong that the sequels are garbage. They're just different. Got to learn them to love them for what they are, not for what they aren't. I struggle strongly with the sequels. For any of you who are Star Wars nerds, those 7, 8, 9. Not my favorites, but I think you make a good point there, Matt, that you have to kind of love them for what they are. Now, my favorite Christmas movie, I already talked about that. My favorite Star Wars movie, you already talked about it in your question here. The best of the saga, Empire Strikes Back. I have had a soft spot for that movie in the Star Wars genre forever. It was one of the first Star Wars, obviously, I saw because it's one of the originals. It's one of the original trilogy. Came out well before I was born, but I was raised on the Star Wars original trilogy. My dad and my brothers and we all went to the original prequel trilogy. We all went to movies when those came out in the late 1990s and early 2000s. But I'm telling you, Empire Strikes Back will always have my heart as a Star Wars fan. So hopefully that answers your question, Matt. All right, there you go. That's what I got for you guys on this Tuesday edition of the podcast. A big thank you, as always, for your guys' support. Coming up on tomorrow's show, barring something crazy in the transfer portal. I can't slow down when the news comes. If it comes, does it come? Can't control all that. If it does come, we'll react to it. If not, got a little conversation I recorded earlier this week at BYU football availability. I did it with Fesi Sitake. Had some great thoughts on the BYU wide receiver group, what he expects going into this bowl game, what he expects from his guys facing off against the reigning Heisman Trophy winner and Travis Hunter. We'll have that conversation on tomorrow's podcast. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. And as always, thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.